Get Rich Education is brought to you by Norada Real Estate, Mid-South Homebuyers, and Ridge Lending Group.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
Here it is. Hey, welcome to Get Rich Education, episode 156. This is your host, Keith Weinhold. Yes, your favorite slack-jawed act is back on track for another wealth-building week, and thank you for making it Monday with us. We're heard in 186 world nations from Azerbaijan to Australia, but we've moved to a Monday release here in the United States. Today, we're talking with a 22-year-old recent college graduate about him not following the herd into a job where you trade your time for dollars, but instead beginning with real estate investing instead of just selling your time for money over and over again, but rather building something that can be scaled for passive income and where you won't be tethered down to one tiny geography nor confined to one employer's fixed hours of business. Now, let's kind of start in high school here, and then we're going to graduate into college, okay? There was recently some research at Boston College that revealed some interesting takeaways. It found that high school valedictorians don't become highly financially successful. Valedictorians do not become billionaires. It is believed that the reason why is because school teaches you to comply with rules. So valedictorians go on to be the people that kind of support the system. They become a part of the system. They don't change the system or overthrow it. It was found that the average GPA, college GPA that is, of 700 American millionaires that were studied is 2.9. Okay, the average college GPA of 700 American millionaires studied was 2.9. Now, I wish they would have studied maybe decamillionaires, which are those people who have a net worth of $10 million or more, because a millionaire isn't really that wealthy these days, but we'll just roll with this Boston College study equating millionaire with financial success here. With those relatively lower 2.9 GPAs, it was found that millionaires are known for grit. That is, they don't comply with rules all that well, but they stick with goals over the long term. And sometimes this group doesn't play by the rules. They do things differently. Because in school, rules are very clear. And in life, rules are not so clear. In life, there are really all these different shades of gray. I mean, that's what you kind of find out pretty soon. The longer that you're out of school, and as life goes on, you feel like you're kind of making things up as you go. And a little later, you realize that to some extent, sheesh, everyone around me is kind of making things up as they go. So a certain amount of not playing by the rules actually is advantageous once you've been out of a closed system like traditional education. That's why, by and large, valedictorians are not billionaires. And a conclusion of that Boston College study was effectively that school grades are not any more predictive of success than rolling a pair of dice. Now, with that being said, I'm sure it's still pretty difficult to tell your daughter or son to stop reading and studying, though. Just go ahead and put away those books. It's not so easy to tell them. My college GPA was 3.46, by the way, so some honors, but not high honors. Plus, my major of geography was not one of the more difficult ones either. Now, is it worth it to go to college at all? Well, I sure cannot answer that for your child. For one thing, some professions that your child chooses, they might make it such that it is mandatory to have a degree. With American college tuition costs rising faster than the rate of inflation for quite a while now, do you know that among the 35 member countries of the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that the highest university costs of all of those 35 member nations are in the United States? Yes, they're higher here than they are in Chile and Japan and Australia and Italy and all the way down the list. And that holds true for both public and private universities. For both types, the United States was still the most expensive. I'll link you to that article in the show notes because it has some colorful graphs and things. But the message is, I don't know that you want to just default into assuming that college is really the right thing for your child without looking into it first. You know, kind of that old style of default is really that style of, well, this is just how people have always done it. It's that sort of thinking. It's that same faulty thinking that also gets savers nowhere because they were told they were supposed to save. It's the same kind of faulty thinking that ends up disappointing 401k plan contributors, or it makes people focus on being debt-free when they could have focused on being financially free, something so much more powerful. So how much higher would tuition actually have to be for it to get your attention? Would it have to be double what it is now, or 4 times higher, or 25 times higher? How high does it have to go? We'll probably chat about that more with our millennial guest today, although I think he went to a fairly low-cost college. And by the way, I am not a millennial. I'd just be aged out and on the young end of Generation X. With entrepreneurship, I think it comes down to being unemployed versus being unemployable in a sense. Okay, unemployed, that conjures up visions of some destitute person that really has no options. Unemployable, on the other hand, that actually describes me, and I think that today's guest is trending that way as well. I am my own boss, and no one can employ me. That's unemployable. When you have the latitude and the options open to you from passive income, from real estate, you might just be unemployable too, or you might want to be. Well, with that, let's meet today's guest. With the youngest listener that we've ever featured here, I'd like to welcome to Get Rich Education 22-year-old Nick Bond.
Thanks, Keith. Good to be here.
Nick, now you just graduated college. Tell us where you graduated from.
So I graduated from the University of Florida up in Gainesville. It's kind of between Orlando and Jacksonville.
Yeah, for those that don't know, it's kind of North Florida, right between those two places. And actually, there's some fairly decent cash-flowing real estate markets around that area there where things make sense from the perspective of rent income to purchase price. Nick, you are a live-in-the-flesh millennial, and millennials get lumped into so many categories, and I swear, I don't know what it is. It seems like the media has some fascination with millennials. Maybe they feel like if they make that as a headline, more people are going to read the article or something, but people just seem to be fascinated with the millennials, probably because they are this generation's up-and-coming generation, and they're also the largest age cohort that there are, more than 80 million millennials, more than there are baby boomers at this point. But the age range of a millennial is age 18 to 35. Demographers are going to vary on that somewhat, but that's generally about where they fall. So I just want to bring up the fact that an 18-year-old millennial is very different from a 35-year-old millennial. An 18-year-old, they might have just graduated high school, whereas a 35-year-old, they might have a spouse, they might have a couple children, they might have a mortgage, they might even have a 401k. I kind of hope they don't. I hope they have income property instead, but in any case, it's quite a broad age range there. So you're on the younger end of that. I'm older. Did your parents want you to go to college, Nick? Did they encourage that?
They did encourage that. My parents do a lot of investing. So, I mean, you do hear that thrown around a lot where it's almost, oh, do I go to college? Is it worth it, my time, worth the money? My parents thought it was worth the time and the money as far as the experience. Maybe not as much the education that you get there and how applicable it might be, but definitely just the growing experience and socializing and getting those skills ready for the real world.
I tend to agree with that. I'm of the mind, however, that the price of a college education has gone up, even on an inflation-adjusted basis, while the value of a college education at the same time has gone down. But that still doesn't mean it's not worth going. And actually, I think that's about the right read on it, because you can get the education online a lot of places these days, like the Khan Academy, and you can get it nearly free, but you really can't replicate that experience. And that experience is more important for some people than others. I grew up in rural Appalachia, where basically everyone was a white person. So by going off to college, I got a significant cultural experience. So when you were in college, what was your major?
I majored in mathematics and also minored in actuarial sciences.
You're a recent graduate. You just graduated this year, so you still got that curriculum pretty fresh in your mind. Do you feel like your major prepared you for a job, like a regular workaday job, or if not a job, something that would produce income? So what are your thoughts there?
My thoughts, I started out actually as accounting and finance and felt that those fields weren't as versatile as I'd like them to be. So that's why I ended up with mathematics. But I do feel like it did prepare me in the fact that mathematics is mostly about problem solving, and people always need problems to be solved. So I just thought that that might be the best major for what I was trying to deliver to people, was solving problems.
Yeah, and successful businesses solve problems. So after college, did the very idea of a job, a workaday job, now did that even sound appealing to you, or were you thinking about any alternatives?
It did sound appealing in the aspect that I wouldn't have to figure out what to do. Someone would just tell me what to do. But I would say, too, that just wasn't the right fit for me as far as flexibility and what I wanted to accomplish. So in the end, it didn't make sense for me.
A lot of 22-year-olds feel like they do need to be told what to do. I was also 22 when I graduated college, and yeah, I sure didn't know what to do. And my parents encouraged me to go to college, and then they just sort of expected that I would get a job afterwards because they didn't come from an entrepreneurial family at all. But you do come from really an entrepreneurial family. In fact, your father's in real estate. So, I mean, was that some sort of influence in that you thinking that you don't need an everyday employee job?
Oh, totally. I mean, probably halfway through my college years, my dad said, you shouldn't get a real job. So that was a major push as well. My mom, on the other hand, she didn't really like that as much. She's a little less risk adverse as far as investing and that type of thing. But they definitely have played a huge factor, and I could not be where I am without them.
I love what your dad said. Repeat what he said. What was his quote? Definitely don't get an everyday job.
Yeah, that's what he told me straight up.
How often do you hear that from any parent? I love it. And yeah, I mean, there are differences between men and women, and sometimes women tend to be more toward the secure end of things. So it was probably good for you that you got a good blend of both from both your father and your mother. When one comes of age, or they're about to come of age, and they're 22 years old, and you're trying to find your place in the world, and you haven't really been out in the so-called real world, and you do feel like you need someone to tell you what to do because you don't know what to do next. And I think it's pretty common inclination for one to feel that way. A lot of your perspective comes from, what are your friends doing? What are your peers doing? A lot of your pull and just where you feel you ought to be finding your place in the world has to do with what your peers and what your friends are doing when you're a 22-year-old recent college graduate. So when it comes to employment and income, and what kind of job position they have, what kind of things are your friends doing?
A lot of them are working in either tech, recruiting, or consulting. And, they're making around 40 to 90,000. So they're doing pretty well for themselves as far as entry-level positions. But, I mean, I couldn't be more proud of them, and they're doing really well. But they definitely thought I was a little crazy when I told them what I was going to do.
Probably. That's still not conventional. To some people that listen to shows like this, they think entrepreneurship's becoming more and more common, or being an independent investor is more and more common, but most people are still on that career track. Most people still seek things like job security. So, okay, 40K to 90K, depending on what part of the country your friends live in, they're probably able to support themselves. How many of your friends went there to the University of Florida that you're talking about?
Practically all of them. One or two maybe that went to a different university, like private schools, but mostly all from Florida.
Okay. And how many still live in that area, and how many have moved, and where have they moved?
It's about 50-50. Some moved to San Francisco, Austin, Texas, Dallas, Texas, Raleigh, North Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina. So a lot of the Southeast and the South, but then that one friend over on the West Coast.
Okay. So quite a few tech hotbeds that are in there. So they think that what you're doing is pretty different, and we're going to talk more about what you're doing in a moment. What about your friends? Are they saddled with student loan debt, just like a lot of millennials are?
Yeah, so that's something that gets thrown around a lot, but we were fortunate enough that in Florida, we have such cheap tuition, especially going to an in-state school.
Yeah.
And then the fact, too, that we have a program in Florida called the Bright Futures Program, where if you do reach a certain level on your SAT and your GPA, at least when we were in college, you get 50% of your tuition covered by the state.
That's pretty generous. So, yeah, maybe at a lower cost school there, they're not saddled with as much debt and they can get ahead because for some millennials, that really thwarts the formation of a down payment to buy their own home when they're so saddled with high student loan debt servicing. So that's pretty generous. Do your friends desire to own their own home at all? Do they desire to own their own principal residence? And do you?
Yeah, I definitely do, as well as my friends. A lot of them are renting right now because they're starting their first jobs in the city and they just moved and they didn't really know the location, a lot of factors there. But a lot do plan to buy a house when I've been, encouraging them to. They seem like they might.
Well, kind of turning the corner into more of what you're doing there, do your friends, do they even desire or want to purchase rental property? Or for like the average 22-ish year old, is that just so far down the road to them that they aren't even thinking about investing in real estate for income?
Yeah, I would say a lot of them haven't really thought about it, but they do really like the idea that I think a lot of the community that invests knows the term house hacking.
Yeah.
As far as, purchasing a house or a duplex and then renting out the extra side or the extra rooms to cover or even maybe a little on top of the mortgage payment.
Yeah, and probably easier than ever to do with Airbnb for house hacking.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting. Airbnb, that kind of started out as something where if someone had a spare bedroom in their home, then they might use Airbnb for that. Or if they had a mother-in-law apartment in the back, they might use Airbnb because maybe they could get a better rate than they could with a long-term rental. But now you have people actually going in and buying a specific property just to hack that whole thing and have that form at an Airbnb nightly level rather than one for long-term renters. So there's just more alternatives there than there have been before. Yeah, I can imagine that, a lot of your friends, they're probably not even thinking about rental property, and often it makes sense to purchase rental property and then rent your own home, rent your primary residence. So tell us some more about what you are doing. You had your father, at least, that didn't make you feel obligated, that you have a workaday job. So that's opened up some time for you to get into some new opportunities. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I've been in the process of trying to set up land business where I just buy and sell land. And that's been a little tough getting the systems in place. I've had a little bit of success, though, in my college years, too, with at least going through a couple deals and then some more that have just happened recently. But it's been an awesome experience and really one that I think I would not have traded for a regular job.
Yeah, there are some advantages to dealing with vacant land, of course. You don't have to deal with RESPA. You don't have to deal with tenants. To some people, they don't understand where the cash flow comes from, but there are ways to make raw land cash flow if you're a little bit creative. So just tell us kind of how you got started in the land investing, and just tell us about your first deal or a typical deal. What stands out there?
Yeah, so I guess about how I got started, it went back to my dad dragging me to a conference before I was really interested in this kind of stuff, which I'm glad he did. But it was a conference about buying and selling land and how to find these deals and how you can work on the exit strategies once you purchase the property. And so I went to this class and learned a lot and then came back and was kind of looking at some properties online. I also had a self-directed IRA that my dad had helped me set up, which I had savings from an internship in. And, as self-directed IRAs, they don't grow unless you're working on them. So I decided to pull the trigger on a random piece of land from an auction website.
Okay.
And I thought, best case scenario, sells and I make some money in my retirement account. Worst case scenario, I hold on to it and maybe sell it later. It happened, too, that I just had drove over to the neighboring properties of this vacant land and was going to knock on doors to see if the neighbors were interested. And they didn't happen to be home. So what I did was I left some sticky notes and just posted them on their door saying, this is my name, my number. Please contact me if you're interested. And the next day, I get a call for 3 times what I bought it for.
Okay, so this is after you had already purchased the property that you were finding out if any neighbors were interested. And how much did you buy it for, and how much did you effectively flip it for?
So I bought it for around $1,850, and then I sold it for $6,000.
That is $1,850 for an entire parcel of vacant land. How much land?
It was about a quarter acre, maybe a little more.
Yeah, and that was right there in Florida?
It was in Leesburg, I believe that's Polk County, and yeah, it was right in a little subdivision.
What was it about you purchasing that particular property from that auction site that made you think that it is a good deal or that it might be a good deal? What did you see in that?
So, yeah, one of the things I guess I checked out before was that there were neighboring properties and that those neighbors owned the home. They had it homesteaded, because I thought if that was the case, they might have a little extra income to buy a property. and then also just using the assessed value that the county uses on their website.
That is business and entrepreneurship, and that is practice doing your own due diligence at a small level and inside your IRA. So, yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. Any of your friends that have workaday jobs, do they know about that deal? Did they have any particular thoughts about your land deal?
Yeah, they thought at first when I told them I was buying it that I was crazy. That was the first thing they said. And then when I came back and said, oh, I had sold it for $6,000, they started to think I was less crazy.
Yeah, right. Well, for one thing, you're living at home?
I am right now, yes.
Nothing necessarily wrong with that. By the way, I lived at home until I was a year older than Nick, until I was age 23. So I had graduated from college for about a full year, and it was age 23 until I moved away from home. And anyway, so yeah, your friends, people tend to stigmatize things and put others in a box or kind of filter things through their own mind. And maybe they hear that you're not emphasizing getting a job and you're living at home. And then the next thing they hear is, oh, what a surprise. Nick went ahead and made a successful land deal after he began educating himself on the process. Any thoughts that your friends really have about investing or stocks or any of them getting into that?
Yeah, so a lot of them have opened 401ks with the companies they work for. And also others are starting to get more interested in less traditional forms of investing, because I would say most are more comfortable with stocks, as most people are. But I actually just had a mutual friend invest in a property with me that went rather well. So that was pretty sweet.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, when you get one of your friends in there and then you feel a little bit validated and then you're able to bounce ideas off of each other and cross-pollinate. That's a great way to get momentum. Well, we're going to come back and talk a bit more with 22-year-old Nick Bond about investing and sort of having a different mindset than most. You're listening to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold.
Are you looking for a roadmap to financial freedom? If so, we have a solution for you. Norada Real Estate is offering a limited number of free strategy sessions to help you get out of the rat race. Learn how you can create wealth and build monthly passive income. To set up a time with one of our knowledgeable investment counselors, simply go to noradarealestate.com. That's NORADA realestate.com.
Cash flow real estate investors, if you're looking for a mortgage loan with a company that specializes in investment property loans, it's Ridge Lending Group. They provide income property loans in almost every U.S. state. Ridge has worked with tens of thousands of investors and homeowners all over the country. In fact, with ethics and transparency, they've helped more people realize their dreams through real estate investing than any other mortgage lender in the country. Get started at ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is our rich dad, poor dad author, Robert Kiyosaki. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold. And the reason I respect Keith, he's a very strong, smart, bright young man.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education with our guest, 22-year-old recent college graduate, Nick Bond. Nick, for one thing, you've been raised a little bit differently. You did have an entrepreneurial family, your father being an entrepreneur anyway. You were on the prestigious Real Estate Guys Investor Summit at Sea this year. I wasn't. I was there last year where I met your parents, so I didn't meet you there this year. But and for those that don't know, the Real Estate Guys Investor Summit at Sea, it's about an 8 or 9 day long summit of a really great group of maybe 150 to 200 pretty elite real estate investors. There's a pretty high price to pay to get on there, and you really have some of the best thought leaders like Chris Martenson and Robert Kiyosaki and Ken McElroy that present on the Real Estate Guys Investor Summit at Sea. And it's really just such a well-done event. When I was at the event last year, they did something like they dropped the tuition for people of about millennial age to a more reasonable price, because usually a ticket is maybe 8 to 10K, so they could bring in a few younger people and get some younger ideas. And I understand, Nick, that was a college graduation gift from your parents?
Yes, it was. It was actually during college, too. And the funny thing I always tell people, and I also told the people on the cruise, was that I actually missed an exam in my real estate class to go on that cruise.
Okay, but yeah, I'm sure you got more than sufficient education for that week plus that you were on the summit.
Yeah, I mean, I probably gained more knowledge that week than I had in my whole semester of college.
Yeah, I can imagine. It was back in the spring, so yeah, you probably did still have a couple months of college left at that point. So What do you see next for you? You know, you're starting to go down a route that's not the quote-unquote traditional route. You're kind of not making money the end thing. When a lot of people get out of college, they ask themselves a question, what can I do to make money? What can I do to make money? And they jump into the first thing that makes money, even if that doesn't fulfill them. But I feel like you've got a mission that's bigger than money being the end thing. So why do you think you're going down this route?
For two reasons. One, the financial independence. That's my main goal, is to see my expenses, kind of reverse engineer that into what do I need to buy that will produce income to meet those expenses.
Yeah.
And then two, really help other people. I feel that if I have that flexibility, I can help others in a significant way. One of those ways, I'm actually coaching at my old high school. I'm coaching soccer. And that's just a way I really think that I could give back to the community, and I wouldn't have had that opportunity otherwise.
Yeah, I love it. You've opened up the time and flexibility so that you can do that. And yeah, it really needs to start with giving back or creating value somehow, because businesses are only successful to the extent that they create value for others. All right, so you've had this successful land deal, and you've basically started your own land investing LLC.
I kind of have a few goals for that too, if I could share those.
Yeah.
One being, I want to make the business completely remote, where I can work anywhere in the world and still be getting the revenue from my business generated. And I'm trying to get that goal done by March, because I've heard of something called the remote living experience, where these people, group of 10 to 15, go to either Asia or Latin America, and they work together in these little remote spaces. And then I guess the second goal too is I'd like to have 75 deals done by the end of the year, or well, the end of when I started. So I guess next July. That kind of came from in a coaching right now with a group called the Land Geek. And one of the top guys there did 68 deals in his first year, and I would really like to beat him.
Wow, that's great to have a goal like that, a longer-term goal and then a shorter-term goal. And, being what we like to call time asynchronous and geographically agnostic in your work, where you're kind of living this lifestyle through Google Drive and through Dropbox, a cloud-based lifestyle. And that's effectively what I do. And it's kind of paradoxical. When you and I are in real estate, we're based on purchasing an asset. For you, it's raw land. For me, it's more residential income property. We're buying an asset that's so based on location, but yet that helps allow us to be location independent, as I might just look at property statements for my property manager across the U.S. and outside the U.S. So it's something that's so geographically affixed to one point that enables us to be basically geographically diverse. And that's interesting. I didn't know that you were working with the Land Geek, Mark Podolsky, because the Land Geek, Mark Podolsky, appeared as a guest way back on episode 27 of this show. So that might be a resource that listeners want to check out if they want to know more about this. And I also appeared as a guest on the Land Geek, Mark Podolsky show. So anything else in particular that you're kind of learning from the Land Geek, or that's really a great technique with using raw land to create cash flow?
Yeah, I think one of the best things that Mark Podolsky and the Land Geek emphasizes is systems, and getting a system in place to where you're automating your business and delegating, so you're not focused on the day-to-day operation, but you're more working on the business than in the business. And I think that's one of the most valuable things that he teaches.
What an employee has to do is basically an employee has to work underneath someone else's systems that someone else, an employer, had to make for that employee. And that's actually the root of a lot of employee frustration. When you run your own business, you kind of have this autonomy to set up the systems that work best for you.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And that's something I definitely experienced when I was interning at a company as an employee.
There's kind of an analogy. If you don't build systems in your business, and if you don't automate systems in your life, it's like you're sort of hauling water buckets to the garden every day, hauling out water buckets by hand, back and forth, making all these round trips. When you set up systems, you basically set up a sprinkler system in your garden one time. That's what we're talking about doing here.
Yeah, that's definitely what we're talking about doing, because at least for me, I always tell this to my parents when we're talking about business, but I think I call it a healthy amount of laziness. But really, my mom says it's more of just you want to get systems in place to get things done, because you want to replace that, that $15 an hour work or that $10 an hour work with the other $1,000 an hour work that you could be doing.
That's right. That is truly working smarter and not harder. A lot of times employees say work smarter, not harder, but they're not looking big picture. They're only looking at their everyday workaday job. And you can think bigger than that, just like you are. Just kind of winding down here, do you have any other advice for other listeners your age that might be hearing this, that are kind of on the young end of that millennial demographic, about age 22 or so? Just any other advice you would have for people that are kind of recent college graduates or in your age group?
Yeah, definitely. And the one thing, I mean, going back to it would be that house hacking strategy. As far as I thought that I had to get a loan, I had to have 2 years of proof of income. And I didn't know the fact that once you graduate, you can use that years that you put in school as part of that proof of income, as long as the field you went into is related to what you studied. My advice would be to check out houses in your area that you can afford, maybe talk to a loan officer, and you could really get a house hack started.
Tell us more about how that proof of income works if you don't actually have the income and you were in school.
When I was working my loan officer, instead of providing that proof of income for 2 years, I just had to send him my diploma and my transcript. And as long as what I was working in had somewhat to do with what I studied, you could get approved for a loan.
Okay, so that's simply it. You're basically exempt from those income rules if you can show those criteria. Okay, that's something very actionable that I didn't know about. It's a great thing for our younger listeners to think about. Well, Nick, is there any website or resource you'd like to let our listeners know about?
Yeah, so that's www.reinveststrategy.com. And I actually run a blog on there too for younger listeners or millennial type age, and what kind of action they can take, and just kind of educating on the real estate investing business.
reinveststrategy.com. That's in the show notes for you. Nick Bond, thanks so much for coming on to Get Rich Education.
Thanks, Keith. It was a pleasure to be here.
Man, I'll tell you what, when I was 22, I wouldn't have been that well-spoken during a chat like this, thanks to Nick Bond. His parents, who, like I said, I met at a real estate investing event on a cruise ship last year, they are real class acts and just some of the finest people that you will ever meet. Yeah, when I was 22, I had just graduated from college in Pennsylvania, and I was back living with my parents in upstate Pennsylvania for a while. At that point, my greatest ambitions seemed to be shooting Nerf basketball hoops in my bedroom, okay? Unlike Nick, I had zero direction. And back then, I felt like I was supposed to get a job, although I didn't really want one. And then I eventually found one working for $10 an hour doing geographic information systems, GIS, basically computer mapping. And at that age, I definitely felt like I needed a superior to tell me, the subordinate, what to do. So it's encouraging to see someone like Nick, along with parental encouragement, be more enterprising. Well, we've got some great future episodes coming up here, and they're probably going to be more, technical than our last couple of shows. I'm going to tell you about the field trip that I took to Belize a couple weeks ago to explore cash-flowing, sustainable agricultural real estate. It's such a cool and fun and even a little bit of an exotic thing to talk about, and it is such a professional operation down there. As an investor, you get cash flow from the annual crop harvest. On another upcoming show, the director of the American Negotiation Institute is going to be here with us. We're going to talk about your best techniques for negotiating the best real estate deal that you possibly can so that you can get more of what you want out of a deal. And getting what you want doesn't necessarily mean that you're taking from someone else either. And then on another upcoming show, we're going to talk about how you can make one single-family home produce $10,000 of monthly cash flow. Yes, you heard that correctly. I want to see you get involved with actionable opportunity for increasing your passive income through, what else? Real estate investing, because that's the vehicle that's made more ordinary people wealthy than anything else. And everyday people like me that were born and raised in Appalachia could never find a prom date and never got great grades in school. Everyday people just like me. The best way for you to do that is by grabbing my email newsletter, which is and always has been 100% free. Stay in the loop. Keep up with the opportunity. What material is in the newsletter, you ask? Well, our newsletter subscribers recently learned about attractive financing options for what you can do when you've exceeded your 10 Fannie Freddie income property loans. It's exactly what you do on loans 11 and more. Get Rich Education newsletter subscribers will also learn about the next income property webinar, which will focus on Baltimore, Maryland. That's tomorrow night, actually, Tuesday evening, October 3rd. At worst, you'll learn about the art of that type of opportunity. To make sure that you don't pay the opportunity cost of missing out, you can grab the free newsletter at GetRichEducation.com. That's all you have to do. As always, we are coming back next week to help you build your wealth. For Get Rich Education's developers, John Collins and Marcus Whelan, sound engineer Vidran Jampo, web designer Nikon Roy, and special thanks to today's guest, Nick Bond, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Be sure to grab the free newsletter at GetRichEducation.com. Don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to Get Rich Education, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.